There has never been another aircraft quite like the F-105 Thunderchief. Not before it. Not since. It was the largest single-engine, single-seat combat aircraft ever built, essentially a flying tank with a jet engine that could push its 50,000-pound frame past Mach 2. It was designed for one mission: fly low, fly fast, go deep into Soviet territory, drop one nuclear bomb, and hopefully get out. It never got to do that. Instead, it was sent to Vietnam. And what happened to it there is one of the most brutal stories in the history of American air power. By the time the war was over, nearly half of all the F-105s ever built were gone. This is what the war did to the Thud. And this is what the Thud did to the war. Before we get to what happened, you need to understand what this aircraft was. Not the specifications, not the numbers, what it actually was at its core before the war got to it. The F-105 Thunderchief was born for a single purpose: to deliver a nuclear weapon and end a war in one strike. This was not a mission with a realistic expectation of survival. The aircraft was designed to fly alone, at maximum speed, deep into the most heavily defended airspace on Earth, drop its internal nuclear bomb, and try to escape the blast radius of its own weapon. Pilots trained for a special maneuver, a half-loop that would toss the bomb forward while the aircraft violently turned and ran. Nobody was certain a pilot could get far enough away in time. The men who trained for this were not training for a war. They were training for a single, unrepeatable, final event, after which the world would be different, or they would not be in it. From this singular purpose, the aircraft developed a personality. Pilots coming from smaller jets described climbing into its cockpit as feeling like they were being swallowed. The ergonomic layout was considered ahead of its time, but the sheer size of the machine was imposing. Its massive J75 engine was so powerful that applying full throttle on the runway felt like an explosion. The machine was brutally fast, almost offensively large, and completely unforgiving. Its early service life was plagued by a high accident rate. The fleet was grounded multiple times. Its nickname, Thud, was at first a dark joke about the sound it made hitting the ground, but the pilots who mastered it found something else. At speed, the Thud became incredibly stable, a rock-solid platform that could absorb damage that would shred other aircraft and keep flying. It was demanding and temperamental, but pilots learned to trust it. That personality, dangerous, powerful, and ultimately trustworthy, was the Thud's core identity. Then, in 1965, someone in the Pentagon decided the aircraft would do a different job. The sustained bombing campaign against North Vietnam, Operation Rolling Thunder, had begun. The nuclear bomber was now a conventional one. The mission it was built for was taken away. The aircraft designed to end a war in a single strike was about to fly the same routes, hit the same targets, and do it again tomorrow. And the day after that, and the day after that. The war asked the F-105 to do the opposite of what it was built for. Instead of a single, decisive blow, it was now fighting a war of repetition. Day after day, Thuds flew from bases in Thailand to bomb North Vietnamese infrastructure. They bombed the same bridges, the same rail yards, the same power plants, over and over again. The Paul Doomer Bridge in Hanoi, a critical supply link, was attacked by Thuds again and again, only to be repaired and attacked again. The aircraft built for finality was now trapped in a loop. The mission itself made the Thud uniquely vulnerable. To accurately drop its bombs, an F-105 had to commit to a dive, making its flight path predictable. The gunners below knew where it was going. The pilot knew they knew. He had to hold the dive anyway. The sky would fill with so much flak that pilots described it as a black snowstorm trying to kill them. Inside the cockpit, the physical sensation was of the aircraft being peppered with gravel as shrapnel raked across the fuselage. The Thud was tough, but against thousands of anti-aircraft guns, toughness was not always enough. Then, a new threat appeared, the Soviet-made SA-2 guideline surface-to-air missile. These were telephone pole-sized weapons that screamed towards an aircraft at Mach 3. A near miss from their massive warhead could tear a plane apart. Early missions against them were disastrous. The briefing for one of the first, codenamed Iron Hand, was based on flawed intelligence. Pilots were told they were hitting active SAM sites. On approach, they saw them. Perfectly constructed decoys. They were already in the dive, committed, when they realized the truth. The trap sprang. Anti-aircraft guns that had been perfectly positioned and waiting opened up from all sides. 6 aircraft were lost. Someone's information was wrong. 6 aircraft paid for it. Every aircraft that was lost was a specific machine. It had a serial number. It had been built in a factory in Farmingdale, New York. It had been flown by specific pilots on specific missions. It had taken damage, been repaired, and sent back. And then one day it didn't come back, and that serial number disappeared from the inventory forever. 382 serial numbers. Gone. The aircraft was not losing. It was being consumed. The aircraft had been asked to carry more than it was designed for. Fly missions it was never meant to fly. Survive threats that didn't exist when it was built. It had done all of it. And then the Air Force found one more thing to ask of it. They asked it to hunt. The answer to the devastating SAM threat was one of the most dangerous jobs ever conceived: the Wild Weasels. The Wild Weasel mission required the pilot to suppress every functional survival instinct a human being has as a professional requirement. He was not simply accepting elevated risk. He was specifically trained to hold course when instruments confirmed a missile was in the air and closing, to fly in ways that made him easier to target, to remain in the engagement area longer than any rational calculation of survival would suggest. His job description was to be the most attractive target in the sky. The Air Force took a 2-seat version of the F-105, packed it with specialized electronics, and sent it into enemy territory first. Its job was to be bait. It deliberately tried to get enemy SAM sites to turn on their guidance radars. In the back seat, the electronic warfare officer watched his screens, translating the raw data of imminent death, signal strength, radar lock, launch detection, into calm, clear instructions for the pilot. The moment a SAM operator painted them, the EWO could pinpoint the radar's location and fire a missile that homed in on the signal. The motto tells the story: first in, last out. They went in before the main strike force, absorbing the undivided, fully alert attention of every SAM battery in the area. Every operator was fresh, every missile was ready. The Weasels flew into that. Then they stayed behind after the bombers left, making sure the path home was clear. By the end of the war, F-105 pilots had been officially credited with shooting down 27.5 North Vietnamese MiG fighters, almost all of them with the internal 20mm cannon. A bomber, winning dogfights. In a war it was never designed to fight. In an airspace it was never designed to survive, doing things no engineer in Farmingdale ever put in a design specification. That number is not a footnote. It is a summary of everything the Thud had become. On April 19, 1967, on his mission into Route Package 6, Major Leo Thorsnes showed what the Thud could do. It was a normal morning, a normal mission, against targets he had seen before. Then his wingman was hit. Thorsnes watched the 2 crewmen parachute out. His orders were clear. He could complete his mission and return to base. That was the rational choice. That was the survivable choice. He chose differently. He stayed. As he circled to protect the downed crew, a MiG-17 fighter appeared, lining up for a pass on the helpless parachutes. A MiG-17 was a dedicated air superiority fighter, lighter and more maneuverable than the F-105, designed specifically for the kind of fight Thorsnes was about to force. In a 50,000-pound nuclear bomber, Thorsnes immediately attacked and destroyed the MiG with his cannon. Low on fuel, he had to leave for a tanker. He knew what he was leaving: 2 men on the ground, rescue helicopters inbound, and more MiGs in the area. But upon hearing that enemy fighters were now threatening the rescue, he made a second choice. He turned back, alone. He spotted 4 more MiG-17s, attacked the formation, damaged 1, and drove the others away to protect the rescue attempt. He flew 10 more missions after that day, showed up 10 more times, climbed into the same aircraft, flew the same routes, and did the same job. On the 11th mission after that day, his 93rd total, a MiG, 21 shot him down. He spent the next 6 years as a prisoner of war in Hanoi. While he was in that prison, the Air Force awarded him the Medal of Honor but told his wife not to publicize it. They were concerned that if his captors knew, his treatment would worsen. For 6 years, the man who flew that mission sat in a cell in the city he had been bombing, unaware that his country had given him its highest award. He found out when he came home. The man who flew that mission spent 6 years in a cell. The aircraft that carried him into Route Package 6 that morning was gone, shot down, consumed, like so many others. But the wild Weasel mission he embodied kept flying. The F-105G, the Hunter, kept flying until the very end. In 1970, the Air Force pulled the F-105D, the single-seat bomber, from combat over North Vietnam. It was not because the aircraft was obsolete. It was because the losses were too high. There is a difference between a weapon that is retired and a weapon that is used up. The Thud was used up. The specialized F-105G Wild Weasels, however, kept flying until the end of the war. The Hunter that the Thud had become refused to quit, even after its original self was gone. 833 F-105 Thunderchiefs were built. 382 never came home. The aircraft designed to end a war in a single strike instead flew the same routes, hit the same targets, and took the same fire day after day for years, until there were not enough of them left to keep going. It never got to be what it was built to be, what it became instead, through the grinding, through the losses, through the men who climbed inside it anyway and pointed it toward the worst sky in the history of air combat, was something the engineers in Farmingdale never drew a blueprint for. It became the kind of machine people are still talking about 60 years later. Not because of what it was designed to do, because of what it refused to stop doing.